The letter from the lawyer arrived on a Tuesday in early November, delivered by a rider who looked at Eleanor Webb with barely concealed pity, the kind of look she'd grown accustomed to in the 2 years since becoming a widow. She stood in the doorway of their rented room above the bakery, the smell of yeast and flour permanently embedded in the walls, her 7-year-old daughter Lily peering around her skirts with curious dark eyes, and read the news that her uncle Marcus had died and left her his property outside of Silverton, Colorado territory. Property. The word seemed generous for what turned out to be an abandoned silver mine and a rough wood cabin that had been sitting empty for 3 years, slowly weathering into the landscape. Eleanor made the trip out to see it the following week, Lily riding behind her on their aging mare Bess, and stood looking at the hillside with a sinking feeling in her chest that threatened to become despair if she let it. The mine entrance was a dark slash in the rocky slope, timbers weathered but still standing. The cabin sat maybe 30 yards away. One room, a stone chimney, windows intact but covered in years of grime. Around them, the Colorado landscape stretched out in browns and grays, sparse pines dotting the hillsides, the first snow already dusting the peaks above. "Mama, it's scary," Lily whispered, staring at the mine entrance. Eleanor couldn't disagree, but what she saw when she looked at that dark opening wasn't just a played-out hole in the ground. She saw shelter. She saw possibility. And most importantly, she saw a solution to a problem she'd been turning over in her mind for months: horses. In Silverton, horses were everything: transportation, freight hauling, ranch work, emergency travel. But Silverton winters were brutal. Last year, she'd watched 3 horses die from exposure when a blizzard had caught their owners unprepared. The local livery was small, expensive, and always full. Most people kept their horses in rough shelters that barely blocked the wind, or in barns that cost more to heat than most families could afford. But a mine? A mine stayed the same temperature year-round. 50 degrees, give or take. Not warm exactly, but far warmer than 20 below zero outside. Protected from wind, from snow, from the killing cold that swept down from the mountains with no warning. Eleanor pulled out the surveyor's map the lawyer had included. The main shaft ran back 100 feet, with 2 side drifts branching off. Plenty of space. If she could figure out ventilation, water, and feed storage. "Mama!" Lily tugged at her coat. "What are you thinking?" Eleanor looked down at her daughter, small for 7, with her father's dark eyes and Eleanor's stubborn chin. They'd been alone for 2 years now, since Ben had died in a logging accident. 2 years of scraping by on washing and mending, of rented rooms and thin soup, of watching Lily wear dresses that were too short and shoes that pinched. "I'm thinking," Eleanor said slowly, "that we're going to build a stable. The best, warmest stable in Silverton." They moved into the cabin 3 days later, bringing everything they owned in 2 trips with Bess. Eleanor spent the first week making the cabin livable, scrubbing, patching chinks in the walls, getting the chimney to draw properly. Lily helped as best she could, her small hands carrying kindling and sweeping floors. But Eleanor's real attention was on the mine. She'd borrowed a good lantern from the mercantile owner, promising to pay for it once she got established. She walked the main shaft carefully, examining every timber, every section of wall. The rock was solid granite. The supports were cedar and still sound. Water seepage was minimal, just slight dampness in the deepest sections. The main shaft would work for the stable itself, wide enough for stalls on both sides, tall enough that horses wouldn't panic. The side drifts could be storage, one for feed, one for tack and supplies. The entrance would need work, a proper door system that could seal against wind but allow ventilation. Eleanor began making lists, calculating costs, figuring out what she could build herself and what she'd need to buy or barter for. Lumber for stalls, hardware for gates, a water system, bedding, tools. "How will we pay for it?" Lily asked one evening as Eleanor scratched figures by lamplight. "We'll manage," Eleanor said, though she wasn't entirely sure how. She had a little money saved, Ben's accident settlement mostly, but not enough for everything she needed. The next morning, she rode into Silverton proper and started talking to people, horse owners mostly. She explained her plan. A stable inside the mine, protected from weather, constant temperature, safe and dry, space for 20 horses, reasonable rates. The reactions ranged from skeptical to openly mocking. A mine stable? Jacob Harmon, who owned the freight company, actually laughed. "Lady, horses need air and light, not a hole in the ground." "The mine has ventilation shafts," Eleanor explained patiently. "And I'll install lamps. The constant temperature means nothing if the horses go crazy from being underground," Harmon interrupted. "Animals aren't meant to live in caves." She got variations of this response all day. Some people were kinder about their dismissal, but the message was the same. Her idea was foolish, impractical, probably cruel to the animals. Only one person seemed interested. His name was Samuel Chen, a quiet man who ran a small ranch north of town and spoke with the careful precision of someone who'd learned English as a second language. "The temperature stays constant?" he asked. "Year-round?" "That's how mines work," Eleanor confirmed. "The earth insulates, 50 degrees roughly, no matter the season." Samuel considered this, stroking his chin. "My barn is drafty. Last winter was hard on the horses, if you can really keep them safe and warm." He paused. "How much?" Eleanor named a price she'd calculated carefully, enough to cover costs and make a profit, but not so high as to be unreasonable. Samuel nodded slowly. "Build it properly, prove it works, and I'll pay for 3 horses, all winter." It was a start. Eleanor began construction the next day. She'd done barn work before, helped Ben with repairs and building projects, but this was different. Everything had to be adapted for underground conditions. She started by clearing the mine entrance area, hauling out loose rock and old equipment. Lily helped with this, filling a small bucket and dragging it outside, her face determined despite the cold that made their breath white clouds. "You're a good worker," Eleanor told her daughter. "I'm helping build the horse house," Lily said proudly, "for when they need somewhere warm." The first major task was creating a proper entrance that could close against weather without trapping bad air inside. Eleanor designed a double-door system, an outer door for wind protection, an inner gate that stayed open for ventilation unless temperatures got truly dangerous. She carved the doors from salvaged lumber, reinforced them with iron straps she traded for by mending the blacksmith's shirts. Inside the main shaft, she began constructing stalls with the methodical care Ben had taught her during their years together. Standard horse stalls ran about 10 feet by 10 feet, but space was at a premium underground and every square foot had to be used efficiently. She settled on 8 feet by 10 feet. Tight but adequate, enough room for a horse to lie down comfortably, but not so spacious as to waste the precious protected area. She built them from rough-cut pine purchased at the lumber yard with careful negotiation, leaving strategic gaps between boards for air circulation while maintaining structural integrity. Each stall got a gate that latched securely with an iron catch, but could open easily in emergencies. She'd seen too many barn fires where horses had died trapped behind stuck doors. The work was exhausting. Eleanor's hands blistered, then calloused. Her shoulders ached from swinging hammers. Lily worked beside her, holding boards steady, fetching tools, never complaining, even when her small hands went red with cold. "Why are you doing this?" Eleanor looked up to find Martha Pruitt, a neighbor woman from down the valley, standing at the mine entrance with her arms crossed. "Building a stable," Eleanor said, straightening her back. "People are talking," Martha said, "saying you've gone touched in the head, a woman alone trying to run a business, and horses in a mine. It's not natural." "Natural is horses freezing to death," Eleanor replied. "I'm preventing that." Martha snorted. "Good luck finding customers. Most folks think you're wasting your time and that inheritance." After she left, Lily looked up at her mother with worried eyes. "Are we wasting our time?" Eleanor set down her hammer and knelt beside her daughter. "Listen to me. People said it was crazy for women to homestead alone, said it was crazy for women to run businesses, said it was crazy for a lot of things that women went ahead and did anyway. We're not wasting our time. We're building something important, and when winter comes hard, people will understand." By mid-December, the stable was functional. Eleanor had completed 10 stalls along the main shaft, each with a water bucket station, feed rack, and thick bedding of straw. She'd installed ventilation improvements, clearing debris from old air shafts and adding simple baffles to encourage airflow without creating drafts. Oil lamps hung from the ceiling at regular intervals, casting warm light on the stone walls. The side drifts were organized for storage. One held baled hay and bags of oats. The other contained tack, saddles, bridles, blankets, grooming supplies. Eleanor had built a small office area near the entrance where she could keep records and meet with clients. She'd also installed a clever water system. The mine had a small natural spring about 60 feet in. Barely a trickle, but enough. Eleanor had carved a channel to direct it into a stone basin, creating a clean water source that wouldn't freeze. From there, she bucketed water to each stall twice daily. Samuel Chen brought his 3 horses in just before Christmas. Eleanor watched anxiously as he led them into the mine, ready for them to spook or balk. But the horses walked in calmly, perhaps sensing the protection from wind, the dry ground, the lack of bitter cold. "It's warmer in here," Samuel said, surprise in his voice. "I can feel it immediately." "The earth temperature," Eleanor confirmed. 50 degrees. It'll stay that way all winter." Samuel examined the stalls, tested the gates, checked the water and feed arrangements. Finally, he nodded. "This is good work. Very good work." He paid her for 3 months upward, and Eleanor clutched the money like a lifeline. It would cover their food for the winter, buy more lamp oil, purchase additional supplies. It was the first money she'd earned from the stable, proof that her idea could work. But 3 horses in 10 stalls wasn't enough to make the stable truly profitable. She needed more clients. The cold came down in January like a hammer. Temperatures dropped to 10 below, then 20, then kept falling. Snow piled up in drifts that reached the cabin's windows. Wind screamed down from the mountains with enough force to tear loose anything not secured, and horses began to suffer. Eleanor heard about it from Samuel, who came to check on his animals and brought news from town. Jacob Harmon had lost a draft horse to the cold, found frozen in its inadequate shelter after a particularly brutal night. The Morton family's mare had developed pneumonia from constant exposure. 3 other horses were showing signs of cold-related illness. "People are desperate," Samuel said, "but they still won't come to you. Pride, mostly, and stubbornness." Eleanor stood in the mine stable, looking at her 7 empty stalls. Outside, animals were dying because their owners were too proud or too skeptical to accept help from a woman with an unnatural idea. "Then we'll show them," Eleanor said. She rode Bess into town the next day, ignoring the biting wind, and went straight to the livery. The owner, a gruff man named Pete Jenkins, was trying to comfort a young couple whose horse was shivering violently despite 2 blankets. "Excuse me," Eleanor said. "I have space available. In the mine stable. It's warm and dry." The young wife looked hopeful, but her husband frowned. "We heard about your place. Seems wrong, keeping horses underground." "What seems wrong," Eleanor said quietly, "is letting them freeze when there's shelter available. My rate is fair. Your horse will be safe, and if you're not satisfied after 1 week, I'll refund your money." The couple exchanged glances. Their horse shivered again, a full-body tremor that showed how close to the edge it was. "All right," the husband said finally. 1 week. Eleanor helped them lead the horse to the mine. Lily was there, ready with a prepared stall. The horse walked in nervously, but once inside, out of the wind, it seemed to settle immediately. Eleanor removed its wet blankets, rubbed it down with dry cloth, gave it warm water and fresh hay. Within an hour, the shivering had stopped. The young couple, their name was Peterson, stood watching in amazement. "It's so much warmer in here," Mrs. Peterson said. "I can hardly believe it." "The earth protects," Eleanor explained, "same as it protected miners for centuries. Animals understand safety when they feel it." The Petersons paid for a month. Word spread quickly after that, the way news always did in small communities. The Petersons told people about the remarkable improvement in their horses' condition. Samuel spoke up at the general store about how well his horses were doing. Even Pete Jenkins grudgingly admitted that Eleanor's stable was working out better than expected. More clients came. By the end of January, Eleanor had 18 horses in residence. The mine stable hummed with activity, horses nickering, hooves shifting on straw, the warm smell of animals and hay filling the air. Eleanor worked from dawn to well past dark, feeding, watering, mucking stalls, checking each horse for signs of illness or injury. Lily helped with everything. She was small enough to duck under horses easily, gentle enough that even nervous animals trusted her. She learned to measure feed, to check water buckets, to recognize when a horse needed attention. Eleanor watched her daughter grow more confident, more capable, more sure of her place in the world. "I like the horses," Lily said one evening as they ate dinner in the cabin. "They're good, and they need us." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "They do." The money was adding up now. Eleanor kept meticulous records in a ledger, tracking payments, expenses, profit. By February, she'd earned more than she'd made in the entire previous year. She started planning. A better cabin, proper winter clothes for Lily, savings for emergencies. But more than the money, there was the satisfaction of knowing she'd been right. The mine stable worked. It kept horses safe and healthy through conditions that would have killed them in conventional shelters. The true test came in late February when a blizzard rolled in that made all previous storms look like gentle flurries. For 5 days, snow fell so heavily that visibility dropped to arm's length. Eleanor couldn't see the cabin from the mine entrance, could barely see her own hands in front of her face. The temperature plunged to 40 below zero, cold enough that exposed skin would freeze in minutes, cold enough that metal became dangerous to touch with bare hands. Wind gusts reached 60 miles per hour, strong enough to knock grown men off their feet and tear loose anything not properly secured. The sound was constant and terrifying, a howling, shrieking wall of noise that never stopped day or night. Eleanor and Lily stayed in the mine stable for the duration, sleeping in the office area, tending the horses around the clock. The mine entrance was completely buried by drifts, but they'd prepared for this. They had shovels positioned inside, extra lamp oil, emergency supplies. In town, the situation was catastrophic. Every horse that wasn't in Eleanor's stable either died or came close. The killing cold penetrated every structure, no matter how well built. Animals froze in their stalls. People burned furniture to stay warm. The community teetered on the edge of disaster. But in the mine, 50 feet underground, the temperature held steady at 50 degrees. The horses were calm, well-fed, safe. Eleanor walked the stalls constantly, checking each animal, making sure water buckets hadn't been knocked over, replacing soiled bedding. On the third night of the storm, someone pounded on the snow-blocked entrance. Eleanor and Lily dug frantically until they cleared enough space to open the door. Jacob Harmon stood there, covered in snow, leading 2 horses that were nearly dead from exposure. "Please," he said, and that single word held more desperation than Eleanor had ever heard. "I was wrong. They'll die if they stay out here." Eleanor pulled the horses inside without hesitation. They were in terrible shape, ice crusted on their coats, shivering uncontrollably, eyes showing white rims of panic. She and Lily worked for hours, rubbing them down, warming them slowly, coaxing them to drink and eat. Both horses survived, and Jacob Harmon, who'd laughed at her mine-stable idea, sat on a hay bale and wept with relief. When the storm finally broke, the community gathered to assess the damage. 23 horses had died in town, nearly a third of Silverton's total horse population. Businesses were shut down because freight couldn't move. Families were stranded because they had no transportation. The doctor couldn't make house calls. The mail couldn't be delivered. The town was crippled. But every horse that had been in Eleanor's mine stable had survived. Not just survived, thrived. They emerged healthy, calm, and ready to work. Within a day, they were the only working horses in the region. The economic implications were immediate and obvious. Eleanor's clients had transportation and freight capacity, while their neighbors had nothing. Those horses were now the most valuable assets in town. And Eleanor controlled access to the only facility that could reliably keep horses alive through extreme conditions. She didn't raise her rates. That would have been cruel. But she did expand. People came begging for stable space, and Eleanor worked with them on payment plans, accepting labor or goods if they couldn't afford cash. The mine had room for 30 horses if she built additional stalls, and she had a waiting list twice that long. By March, she'd hired 2 men to help with the heavy work, young ranch hands who'd lost their employment when the ranches they worked for had lost their horses. By April, she'd started construction on an addition to the cabin, real bedrooms for her and Lily instead of sharing a single room, a proper kitchen with a cast-iron stove and counter space, a sitting area with real furniture. She ordered glass windows from Denver that came wrapped in straw and cost more than she'd earned in 3 months at the bakery. She bought warm winter coats that actually fit Lily's growing frame, boots that didn't pinch, dresses that were new instead of mended hand-me-downs. The town council came to visit in early May, after the snow had finally melted enough to make travel easy. Mayor Augustus Polk, the same man who dismissed her idea as impractical back in November, stood in the mine stable looking around with genuine wonder. "Mrs. Webb," he said formally, "on behalf of Silverton, I want to thank you. Your ingenuity and hard work saved our town's transportation system. Without the horses you sheltered, we would have faced true catastrophe." Eleanor stood with her arm around Lily, both of them tired but proud. "I just saw a problem and found a solution," she said. "You did more than that," Polk replied. You built something this community desperately needed, even though we were too foolish to see it. We'd like to make your stable the official emergency shelter for livestock in the county. There would be a small stipend involved and guaranteed business during crisis periods. It was recognition, legitimacy, security, everything Eleanor had worked for. I accept, she said. Summer brought more changes and opportunities Eleanor had never imagined possible. She expanded the stable to accommodate 40 horses, carefully excavating additional space in one of the side drifts and reinforcing it with proper timber supports. She added a covered exercise area at the mine entrance where horses could stretch their legs protected from rain or excessive sun. She installed a better water system with pipes and spigots connected to the spring deep in the mine, replacing the laborious bucket system. She hired Sarah Jennings, a young widow with 10 years of experience training horses at her late husband's ranch, to help run the day-to-day operations and provide expert care for the animals. This freed Eleanor to focus on business management, client relations, and planning for the future expansion she could now afford to consider seriously. Lily started school in town that fall, riding in each morning on their new horse, a gentle chestnut gelding named Copper that Eleanor had purchased from a grateful client at a fair price. She was behind the other children in reading and writing, but ahead in practical mathematics, able to calculate feed ratios and profit margins in her head faster than most adults with pencil and paper. The teacher, Miss Harriet Stone, said she was one of the brightest students she'd ever taught. Your daughter has a remarkable mind for logistics, Miss Stone told Eleanor at the summer social. Have you considered sending her to Denver for higher education when she's older? Eleanor had. She'd been considering a lot of things that had seemed impossible a year ago. College for Lily, maybe expansion. Other towns had abandoned mines that could be converted. A real business empire built on an idea that people had called crazy. In August, the Silverton newspaper ran a feature article about Eleanor and her mine stable. The reporter, a young woman from Boston, seemed fascinated by the whole operation. What made you think of it? She asked as Eleanor showed her around the facility. Necessity, Eleanor said simply. I had an asset that seemed worthless but actually had specific valuable properties. I had a community need that wasn't being met. I just connected the two. But you're a woman alone, the reporter pressed. Weren't you afraid? Eleanor considered the question seriously. I was terrified, she admitted. Every day, especially at the start, but fear and action aren't mutually exclusive. You can be afraid and still do what needs doing. The article, when it published, painted Eleanor as a pioneering businesswoman who'd combined scientific knowledge of geology with practical animal husbandry to solve a critical infrastructure problem. It was picked up by other papers, and suddenly Eleanor was receiving letters from as far away as Montana and Wyoming, mine owners asking for advice, communities inquiring about replication, entrepreneurs wanting to partner. Eleanor answered every letter carefully, sharing what she'd learned, offering guidance freely. She remembered too well what it felt like to be dismissed and ignored. If her experience could help others, she'd share it gladly. The second winter was less dramatic than the first, but the stable was even more successful. Eleanor had a full client roster by October, with a waiting list of 15 more. She'd implemented improvements based on lessons learned, better ventilation systems, improved feeding schedules, a health monitoring protocol that caught problems before they became serious. She'd also started offering breeding services, training programs, and veterinary consultation. The mine stable had evolved from a simple shelter into a comprehensive equine care facility. Her annual income now exceeded what Ben had made in his best years at the logging company. On Christmas Eve, Eleanor stood at the mine entrance watching snow fall soft and steady. Inside, 40 horses were warm and safe. In the cabin, Lily was decorating a real Christmas tree, pine boughs hung with glass ornaments Eleanor had purchased from a catalog, something she'd never imagined being able to afford. Samuel Chen came up the path carrying a wrapped package. "For Lily," he explained. "A thank you for taking such good care of Midnight." "You don't have to." "I know," Samuel interrupted gently, "but I want to. Your daughter works as hard as any adult I know. She deserves recognition." After Samuel left, Martha Pruitt appeared, the woman who'd told Eleanor she was wasting her time. She stood awkwardly at the gate, holding a basket covered with cloth. "I made extra cookies," she said gruffly. "Thought you and the girl might like some." Eleanor accepted the basket with a smile. "That's very kind, Martha." Martha shifted her weight. "I was wrong about you in this place. I said cruel things. I'm sorry." "Water under the bridge," Eleanor said. "Come in, have some coffee." They sat in Eleanor's new parlor, drinking coffee from real china cups, while Lily showed Martha her schoolwork. It was a small moment, but it represented something larger: acceptance, community, belonging. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed clutching the toy horse Samuel had given her, Eleanor sat by the fire and allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd accomplished. She'd taken an abandoned mine and transformed it into the economic heart of the community. She'd built a business from nothing. She'd provided for her daughter and secured their future. But more than that, she'd proven something important: that a woman alone could succeed, that unconventional solutions could solve critical problems. That being dismissed and mocked didn't mean being wrong. Eleanor pulled out her ledger and opened it to the last page, where she kept her long-term plans. Expansion to other towns, a breeding program for cold, hardy horses, maybe a book about underground stabling techniques. The possibilities stretched out before her like the mine tunnels, dark at first glance but full of promise once you brought a light. Outside, the temperature was dropping toward zero, but inside the mine, 50 feet into the mountain, 40 horses stood warm and safe in their stalls. And in the cabin next door, a woman and her daughter slept peacefully, knowing they'd built something that would last. The mountain held them all gently, woman, child, and horses, protecting them from the killing cold. Eleanor had looked at darkness and seen shelter. She'd looked at abandonment and seen opportunity. She'd looked at impossible and proven it wrong. And tomorrow, she'd wake up and do it all again. Because that's what pioneers did. They took what they were given and made it into something better. They built on stone when others built on sand. They dug deep when others stayed shallow. They survived. They succeeded. They showed the world what was possible. And sometimes, impossibly, the world listened.